Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Gimel continues and concludes the discussion as to what the meaning of the word or is. It then discusses why we use the word or instead of a simpler word, and the reason will be because it's a cleaner language. And then we have a few examples of going out of our way to use clean language. We'll balance that out against sometimes which we didn't use clean language, and we'll understand what the rule is when you use a cleaner language and when you don't. And then the Gemara continues bringing a number of stories of people who didn't use a clean language and how we checked after them and found that they had problems, and along the way we'll have some stories about other people who were checked out and found to have problems. So again, first of all, we're in the middle of a discussion as to what the word or means. Where do we have the word or? We said that B'dikas Chametz has to be done or to the 14th of the month of Nisan, and we want to know what or means. Does that mean the morning of the 14th, or does that mean the night preceding the 14th? That was our machokis, and now we're going to be bringing a number of proofs from Brises and Mishnayos that use the word or to clearly mean night, and all of them are conclusive proofs that the word or means night. The first one is from a discussion of a woman bringing a carbon yoledes. So now the halacha is that when a woman gives birth, or if she has a miscarried child after a certain stage of development, she has to bring a carbon for it. Now, she has until 80 days after the birth to bring the carbon, and during that time she may actually get pregnant and miscarry again. If the second miscarriage happens within 80 days, then the halacha is she doesn't have to bring a separate carbon. Both births or miscarriages can go together under one carbon. The question is, what happens if it happens on the night following the conclusion of the 80th day? Were the miscarriage to happen on day 81, and then she certainly has to bring a separate carbon for that miscarriage as opposed to the one earlier. What about the night between? So that's a machokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says have to bring another carbon, and Beis Shammai says no. If the miscarriage happens the night following the conclusion of the 80th day, but before the 81st day, then that's included. They don't have to bring another carbon. Beis Hillel says, why should it be different? Why should the night be different than the day that follows it? We know that the halacha of the night is part of the 81st day, so why should it be different? Beis Hillel have another taina. They say that the halacha is that during the 80 days, at least the last 66 out of the 80 days, any blood which the woman would bleed would be called dam tahor. It wouldn't be dam nida, it wouldn't be dam yoledes. And that would be true up until the conclusion of the 80th day. From sunset that day, the night following it, that dam was already dam tameh. So you see that the night that follows day 80 counts already as day 81. So why should it be different? Beis Shammai responded, and they say the reason is because you cannot bring a carbon at night, and therefore the time for bringing a carbon only begins in the morning of day 81. Therefore the night would be included in the previous time as far as carbonos are concerned. Now, in the Brisa that discusses this, it says Hamapeles or Lishloinim, somebody who has a miscarriage on the or of the day Shmonim ve'echad. It says on the or of the 81st day, and that clearly is referring to the night before, because that's what the whole discussion is about. So that is a conclusive proof that the term or refers to the nighttime. Okay, now the Gemara brings another proof, and this is from the halacha of karbanos. Karbanos, there are two zones in which they may be eaten. Some karbanos are eaten for 1 day, and some karbanos are eaten for 2 days. Now, the carbon which is eaten for 1 day says clearly can be eaten for the day and for the night that follows. The carbon which should be eaten for 2 days, you would think that could be eaten for 2 days and both nights that follow each of the days. It says that in the morning, when the morning after the time which you're supposed to eat it, that's when it becomes nicer, that's when it becomes leftover, and something which is nicer is usher to eat it, and it must be burned. So when it's a 1 day carbon, it doesn't become nicer, it doesn't become leftover until the morning that follows. It's a 2 day carbon, you should think that it should be not nicer until the third morning that follows, and you should be allowed to eat it this second night. But the Gemara says that is not the case. The case is that you can only eat it for 2 days and the night between them, but the second night is already nicer. You can't eat it. Why? Because it says, B'yom zev chachem yoichal, you should eat it on the day that you slaughtered it, umi macharas, and the following day. But once the following day is over, you can't eat it in the following night. Now, that being the case, you would think that it should be burnt then. The halacha is, of course, that whenever you're not allowed to eat it, you burn it right away. The halacha of nicer is that you burn it as soon as eating stops. However, if it's a one-day carbon, you could eat it for the day and for the night, and as soon as the night ends, it becomes nicer, and you burn it immediately. So you would think that you should burn this also immediately. As soon as the second day ends on a 2-day carbon, you should burn it immediately, because it's nicer already. On that, we have another pasuk that says, it's only on the third day that you actually burn it. So here you actually have a night, an entire nighttime where you can't eat it, but it is not considered to be burnable yet. You can't burn it yet. Now, in this entire brisa, the language says or l'shlishi. We're all discussing the night before the third day. It calls it or l'shlishi, so it's clearly referring to the nighttime as or, and therefore it's another conclusive proof that or refers to nighttime. Our next proof is from the Shemona Esrei of Yom Kippurim. We know that Yom HaKippurim, Shemona Esrei, is 7 brachos long. The Brisa lists off the Shemona Esrei of Yom Kippurim that you say 7 brachos plus Vidoy, and it says first is Or Shel Yom Kippurim, then Shachris, Mincha, Shachris, Musaf, Mincha. All of these you say 7 brachos and Vidoy. So you see, it clearly refers to Or as the night beginning Yom Kippur, the night before. Now, what about Ma'ariv afterwards? So on that, the Brisa brings a machlokes. The Tanna Kama says you can say a shortened version of Shemona Esrei, a shortened one bracha, which includes pieces of all 18 standard weekday brachos. Yom Kippur is over, so you're saying weekday Shemona Esrei. You want to say a shortened version so you could go home and eat. And Chanina ben Gamliel says no, you should say the full Shemona Esrei because you want to say Chayne and Hadas. You want to say the bracha of Havdalah to be mavdil between Yom Kippur and the weekday in the bracha of Chayne and Hadas. Again, you clearly see that the word or refers to nighttime because we refer to the night beginning Yom Kippur as or. Now, the Gemara says, you're right. Actually, we have one more right here, and this is from a brisa which is very similar to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had said that you do b'dikas chametz on or la'arba asar. You have a brisa here that says, it's brought by the Yeshiva of Shmuel, it says Leilei Arba Asar, the night of the 14th. So you see again, as explicitly as you can, that the time for B'dikas Chametz is the night beginning the 14th, and therefore when our Mishnah said Or Arba Asar, it obviously means the night beginning the 14th, not the morning. So now the Gemara says, so obviously we misunderstood what the machlokes is. Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda both agree that the word or means nighttime. What were they arguing about when one said or is light and one said or is night? Because in one of them, in his town, they called the night light. They were both referring to the nighttime, but one of them called it night and one of them called it light because in his town they use a euphemism for night and they call it light. That's why he said that or means light. It was just a question of a mistake in what his language meant. That's what we didn't understand. Okay, now the Gemara wonders, why does our Mishnah use the word or? We have a brisa that calls it laila, it calls it night, so why can't we use the word or? So the Gemara says it's a cleaner language. There's nothing wrong with saying night, but it's okay to say a more bright, a more hopeful, a more lichtig language and to call it the night before. And this is like a statement which we've seen in the name of Rav Yeshua ben Levi, who always says you should always try to use a cleaner language. You shouldn't use a disgusting, disgraceful language. Not that there's a disgraceful again, Rashi spells out, but you should try to avoid disgrace. And he says, and now we have a list of Tanaim and Amoraim who show where the Torah and the Psukim went out of its way. It even wrote extra letters in order to have a cleaner language. So it says, describing the animals, so Yeshua ben Levi says, we went 8 letters out of the way. We said, Min HaBehema Torah, Min HaBehema Asher Einena Tahira. We could have said, Min HaBehema Torah, Min HaBehema Tameya. Tameya would be 5 letters. Asher Einena Tahira is 13 letters, so we went 8 letters out of the way. Rav Papa says actually it's 9 letters out of the way, because we see the pasuk says Ki b'cha ish asher lo yiyeh tar mikre layla. We could have said ish asher yiyeh tamei asher lo yiyeh tar mikre layla is 9 letters out of the way. That's assuming you spell tahar without a vav. Ravina says you could spell tahar with a vav, and that would be 10 letters out of the way. Loi yihye tahar yihye 4 letters, tahar with a vav is 4 letters, and loi is 2 letters is 12, but talmei would be 3 letters, so that's the 9 and the 10th letter. Rachel Bar Yaakov says actually we'll find a case where we went 16 letters out of the way, like we say Ki Amar Mikrahu Bilti Tar, Ki Hulei Tar, when Shaul was upset that David did not come to the Suda of Rosh Chodesh. So when he missed the Suda once, he said, "Oh, I figured he was Kilei Tarahu Bilti Tahar." Again, he didn't say he was Tameh, and that's 16 letters extra that he could have said. Now, the Gemara continues on this theme. A Brisa says from Rabbi Yishmael, you should always speak in a clean language. You see the Torah, when it's describing a zav and a zava, the items that they sit on become tameh. But when it discusses what is, now it's the same. Whatever becomes tameh by being sat on or rode upon or lain upon by a zav and a zava, a man and a woman zav, are both the same. However, it uses different language to describe it. By a zav, it says merkav, it says what he rides on, and by a woman, it says Moshe, what she sits on. Why? Because we don't want to use language that implies a woman riding, that implies that she sits astride and she spreads her legs across the back of the animal. That's not a clean language to be referring to. So, therefore, for the woman, we say that she sits. Now, the Brisa continues, and it brings psukim to say that you should also use this clean language. It says, "V'tifchar lashon harumim," pasuk in Eov, you should choose a wise language. And another pasuk in Eov says, "V'das sifsei boror milelu," they always speak in a clean. They know how to speak in a clean, pure language. Now the Gemara says, why do we need these two psukim? Why do we need any psukim at all? Why isn't enough to just say it straight? So the Gemara says, well, if I would have only said halacha, you would think that that's only when the Torah talks about merkav and Moshe talks about the riding and the sitting. That's the Torah's language. Hashem uses clean language, but how do I know that the Chachamim should also use clean language? So for that we have the first pasuk with Tivchar Lashon Harumim, and then that everybody in their everyday speech should use clean language. We say Vadas Sifsei Boror Milelu. Okay, now the Gemara asks, hold on a second. Well, we do find the term Rachav, riding, referring to women. It says Rivka rode on the camels when she went back to Yitzchak. So Gemara says that's different. Riding a camel is scary, and you want to sit and grip the camel with your knees, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to say that she sat on the camel. It's not how you don't sit on a camel. You have to say riding on the camel. The language doesn't make sense. The next thing is that it says V'yikach Moshe's Ishlei v'ezbonav yarkivim al chamar. He took his wife and his children, and he rode back to Mitzrayim on the donkey. There, it's not a camel, so why would you say Vayarkivim? They should say that they sat. Where it says there was a different thing. There he had his sons on the camel. So the word Vayarkivim is meant to apply specifically to the sons, and obviously also includes his wife, but it's not considered an unclean language. Another example, the Gemara though says when Avigail went to David HaMelech's encampment, so it says V'hiroi Cheves al Chamar, she was riding on the donkey. So Gemara gives a few answers here. The Gemara says, first of all, either it was nighttime, and the fear of riding at night makes you grip it firmly, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to say she sat, or the fear of David HaMelech himself, because he was on the warpath, or the fear of the mountain would be another reason, or just the fear of the road, traveling along the road in the dark would be another reason that she would have to grip it firmly, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to say that she sat on the donkey. You would have to say that she rode the donkey. So now the Gemara asks, don't we find the word tameh in the Torah many times? How could you tell me that you always have to say einoi tahor? Tameh appears many times. So the Gemara says, okay, so here's what we do. When it's not longer, we write a clean language. But if it's longer, you don't have to. You could use a shortened language. It's also important to speak shortly. Like we learn, Rafuna says in Rav, you should always speak in a short language. You should teach your Talmidim in shortened words. So when it's the same length, you should choose the cleaner version, but you don't have to speak in a cleaner version if it's longer. And Rashi points out, even though we had many examples of that earlier, but this is why the Torah sometimes uses the longer language and sometimes uses the shorter language to show that both are important. The cleaner language is important, and the longer and the shorter language is important. Therefore, we use both. We have both examples to show you that both are important. Lemaisa, what should you do? You should use the cleaner language if it is not going to add length. So now the Gemara says, but the word roicheves and yosheves are the same length. So why would it say rocheves instead of yosheves? The Gemara answers that rocheves is spelled without a vav, and therefore it's shorter than yosheves. Now Rashi points out he could have also spelled yosheves without a vav. Now Rashi says that the reason why it writes rocheves without a vav is to teach you that it's okay to use a less clean language if you're going to use it shorter. Okay. Now the Gemara brings a few stories of Talmidim who did not use a clean language, or not as clean as they could have, and the repercussions that it had for them. So Gemara's first incident is two Talmidim who were sitting in front of Rav, and they apparently didn't like the sugya they were learning, and one said that I am finding this sugya to be as tiring as a pig, and the other one said I'm finding it to be as tiring as a goat, and Rav then forth refused to speak to the one who said the pig. It's not a respectful way of speaking. In another incident, two Talmidim were sitting in front of Hillel. One of them was Rechem et Zakkai, or alternatively, they were sitting in front of Rebbe. One of them was Rabbi Yechanan, and they asked the question. We know that the halacha is that if you pick grapes and olives and you put it in a kli, then some juice will squeeze out, and the juice serves to make the grapes or the olives, the fruit, to be machshir, huchshar, to be mechabel tumah. Once it becomes wet, it can become tameh. So if the kli is tameh and it gets wet through the juice that's squeezed out, it'll make the fruit tameh. However, we say that you only have to be careful that the kli be tahor if it's talking about grapes. If you're picking olives, you don't have to, and the reason is because the olive juice is not real oil. It's not, when it squeezes out, it's just a light liquid. It's not actual oil, and therefore it's not actually machshir, and it won't be metamid. But these Talmidim asked what the difference is, and one of them said, how come grapes you pick bit tahara, and olives you pick not necessarily bit tahara? That was a clean language. The other one said, how come grapes you pick bit tahara, and olives you pick bit tuma? So on that basis, Hillel said, so I see that this one who used a cleaner language, he will become a Meir Harav Yisrael, he will become a posek for Klal Yisrael, and indeed it was not too long before he did become a great leader and scholar for the Jewish people. Okay, now the Gemara brings the story of three Kahanim that were complaining about the amount of lechem apanim that they received. One of them said I got the size of a bean, one said I got the size of an olive, one said I got the size of the tail of a lizard, and they said that's not a clean way of talking. They checked after him and they found shemetz psul, a bit of an indication of something incorrect about his lineage, and he wasn't really kosher to do the avodah. The Gemara says, hold on a second, but we have a rule that anybody who was allowed to do the avodah on the mizbech, you shouldn't check his lineage afterwards, because if they allowed him onto the mizbech, they certainly checked him, and you know that he's good. So the Gemara says, okay, either you have to change the language to shachatz psul. It's not that he had something wrong with his lineage, but he had something wrong with his personality. He was a bit uncouth, and therefore they didn't want to do that avodah anymore. Or it's possible, if there's no reason to suspect that somebody who did the avodah on the mizbech, you don't have to check into him again. However, if you see something that makes you feel like he's not appropriate, then you should check again. And indeed, they did check, and they found this incident. Now, on the subject of somebody who they checked into and found the psul, the Gemara brings a famous story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira and the guy. So there was a guy who used to go to Yerushalayim and demand to eat from the carbon Pesach, and he pretended to be a Jew so that they would give him, and he was eating, and then he came back to the town of Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, which was Nitzivan, where he lived, and he said, the pasuk says, Kol benech lo yechal bai, kol oral lo yechal bai, somebody who's a stranger is not allowed to eat from the carbon Pesach, and someone who didn't have a bris is not allowed to eat it, but I'm both of these, and I'm eating from the best of the best. Now, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira was not in a position to do anything about it. He wasn't traveling, and he couldn't take action, but he did have a solution. He said to this guy, do they give you from the tail? The fatty, juicy tail is very delicious. Do they give you that? And he said, no, they don't. He said, well, then they're not giving you the best of the best, and if you pay for the best of the best, go back there and demand the best of the best. So the next day, that's what he did. He went and demanded from the tail. And they said to him, the tail goes in the mizbech. Nobody eats the tail. Now, as a guy, he was not aware of that. So they said, who gave you this idea that you should go ask for the tail? He said, well, it was none other than Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira said I should. So you should listen to him, and you should give it to me. So they said, hold on a second. Yehuda ben Beseira told him to ask from the tail. Yehuda ben Beseira for sure knows the tail. It goes in the Mizbech. Every Jew knows that. So they checked into him. They said, there's something fishy here. They checked into him, and they found out that he was indeed a guy, and therefore they got rid of him. And they sent a message to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, although you are off in Netzivan, your net is spread all the way until Yerushalayim. Okay, another incident about communicating in a nice and kind, polite way. The Gemara says that Rav Kahana was ill, and the Rabbanan sent Rav Yeshua, Brei the Rav, in order, Brei the Rav Edi, to go check out and see how he was and find out if he was surviving and what his din was. When he came and he arrived, he found that he had already passed away. In order to give the message gently, he tore his cloak, as Kriya, as we're supposed to for a Talmud Chacham, Moflug, but then he turned his cloak backwards so that they wouldn't see him coming with a torn shirt. And he was crying, and he came, and they said to him, does this mean that he died? And he said, I didn't say anything, because the one who brings bad news is a fool. You figured it out. I didn't say it at all. Similar incidents with somebody in the name of Yechanan Chakuka. There's a name that they gave him. So he went to check on the grain. When they came back, they asked him, how's the grain? So he said, they asked him, how's the wheat? So he said, the barley is doing good. He didn't want to say bad things about the wheat. He didn't want to say a kalala, a curse. So they said to him, that's not the right way to talk. That's if you want to say the barley is doing good, you could go inform that to the horses and to the donkeys. They're the ones who eat the barley. People don't eat. It's not human food. So, like the pasuk says, so the Gemara says, well, what should he have said? He was trying to speak in a clean language. The Gemara said he should have said either last year the wheat was doing good, or should he said the lentils were doing good. At least lentils is human food. Should not have said barley, which is not.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.